This is an open letter to the American people. My name is Tim Armentrout. Each day when I wake up into this pandemic, I read the news. What I really want to do is scream until some vibrational frequency somehow switches just enough of this timeline around that when I quit screaming, enough will feel normal enough for a little while longer. But I don't scream. I keep reading. This isn't normal. Or is it? Sigh. This is normal for America. While things have remained slow, I've been able to reassess, to make stronger efforts to put my attention and time into things that genuinely matter. I have cut toxic ties, unfollowed points of irritation within my social media, any small gesture to combat the tension twisting knots into the muscle fabric of our national conscience and make this time seem a little bit less bleak. It's worth doing. As this election looms over us all, I would really just like everyone to take a step back, breathe, and for a moment, suspend your personal platforms and give real solid consideration to making a collective decision to use this opportunity to consider ways for our country to perform differently. If personal beliefs and thoughts can remain suspended temporarily, first, ask yourself if you practice sympathy, which, to be clear, is the ability to take part in someone else's feelings. Choose from the myriad examples recently of another human or group of us experiencing trauma. Identify one that does not make sense to you. An easy example I've heard echoed all too often regards the demonstrations surrounding police brutality and racism and why the phrase Black Lives Matter is so critical to stamp into the lexicon. It shouldn't be difficult for anyone to process why it's happening, but it is. And in order to attempt an explanation, let's first examine a more simple social interaction. Consider how friendships have come and gone in your life. All of us can identify that ebb and flow. One of my oldest friends recently told me that I was stupid for getting aggravated about the refusal of so many people to just put on the mask. He went on to say that this entire thing is bullshit. No one he knows had died, and therefore it's all being spun out of control. No mask for him, no mask for a lot of folks. So let's pause and break this down. The belief articulated there, I have not seen, experienced this, therefore it does not impact me, it isn't real, and so forth. Personally, I grind my teeth at spelling this out for anyone, but that's apparently how bad off we truly are. And my intention is to reconnect us. So here's a list of things we should all be able to agree that people accept to be true and factual without having directly experienced. Oceans, a baby being born, farm life, city life, a concert. These are simple concepts. Yet his conclusion about the pandemic is one several people have reached. Because it enrages me that anyone can be so completely narcissistic. Here are two more widely held beliefs people accept, regardless of whether or not they are fact. But the one thing that remains true is that no one alive has actually seen Jesus, dinosaurs. Take your pick. Now, go seek out one of the millions who recently lost someone and continue a dialogue. Everyone suffers. Don't compare yours to anyone else's. Just be considerate. Empathy is the next step. It requires us to make the effort to understand another's feelings. I do not understand the covert racist groups rallying behind this moment. First, for their rhetoric of denial, and second, for not applying the same racist standard to an orange guy. However, the underlying frustration driving them is absolutely palpable. The thing they do not understand is that he doesn't believe what they believe. He is indifferent to everything equally, and he is using them as free soldiers, but for a completely different war than they're envisioning. Watching people support hateful ideology is not easy, but I understand how misguided ideas can pollute the mind. Personally, I have never felt represented by any politician in Washington, especially elected officials from my home state. Half the country doesn't even know that West Virginia is actually a state. It's a fact those of us from here all learn when given the chance to travel. Oh, how close is that to Richmond? 3 things that make it super easy to remember. 1, a U.S. map. 2, we're the only state that was formed from the Civil War when we broke from Virginia. And 3, we're the only one shaped like a middle finger. It expresses for its residents what we all feel when the stereotypes are all anyone actually knows. Living in the margins and feeling powerless to change the circumstances we're born into creates so much resentment. I absolutely understand that. It doesn't matter what side you're on, we are all boiling over together. I think it's a fine time to indicate a few things to our representatives working harder to piss one another off than make any decision based on the people they claim to care about. If you think the populace isn't being pitted against itself, again, suspend your personal affiliations and picture all 331 million of us and counting. I'm admittedly not strong with mathematics, but it doesn't take much calculation to reach the conclusion that 2 parties cannot possibly represent the diversity of interests in a group of people that large. I'd also like to add to the record that when those only 2 choices have blatantly refused to make any legitimate compromises not born from their mutual self-interest for years, it borders on delusion to think it can work any longer. Really, it borders on delusion to think it was ever working at all. We're all being led to our doom by groups of profiteers using us for their own gain. That is all we have ever been. Pawns to get sick old men their rocks while watching the old South rise again to pit family against family. If there was any remaining doubt about the joke the American government is, after the demonstrations and demands of the people that justice be served have been ignored, the debate sealed that. These men are 74 and 77. I know an 80-year-old who can still outski kids in their 20s. Age and ability are not my concern. Generally speaking, though, why would any of us put our grandparents in charge of the country? Joe Biden appeared he may stroke out at any moment. And to be fair, if you've ever tried to have an important conversation with children and struggled through the task of teaching them not to interrupt, while at the same time trying to keep your parental composure, it is understandable. The real treacherous thing, though, is that it seems evident enough that the president was deliberately trying to cause his opponent to stroke out by acting like the Stillwell angel leader of the free world. Personally, I appreciated Biden telling him to shut up. I felt the addition of man at the end was a cheap ploy to make himself seem hip. The introductory images on the screen prior to their entrances were direct knockoffs of 80s era WWF main event, and it was billed versus like it was going to be held inside the squared circle. All the world's a stage indeed. Chris Wallace is guilty of fanning the flames as well for how he phrased the question about Trump supporters taking to the streets if he doesn't win. That was a white boy alley-oop. This sick joke has gone on long enough. The debate and how Chris Wallace chose his words is an important point to expand. He asked the question in a way that intentionally made it seem as if he was genuinely giving the president a chance to condemn white supremacy. But what he did provided a way to mention the Proud Boys specifically and pretend as if it were just a casual part of the conversation. It was a dastardly move. Our unique use of language is a tool gifted to us for sacred purposes. But we're inundated by language shaped coyly into a weapon of deception and distraction. We are all equally vulnerable to this abuse of power as both communicator and listener. Each of us too has the choice of becoming the abuser. Consider, too, that various social constructs have suppressed the perception of language as a tool at all. Think about overheard phrases such as reading is stupid, brainiac, I hate school. These are seeds of suppression planted early in life that grow into a know-it-all or don't care kind of attitude before the mind has even had the chance to open. That's if we're envisioning an educational setting, not to exclude various other experiences causing us to have no choice but to enter survival mode early in life. Whether we make use of it or not, language is one of the most powerful forces imaginable, and all of us have it. If that doesn't sound dangerous, then picture a group of people all crowded together in a room, each one carrying a chainsaw. Some of them don't know how to use it, but there it is, always with them. A small few know how to get to work cutting and trying to teach the others who are willing to learn. But over in the corner, someone else knows how to operate the machine. No one else hears the engine fire. Slaughter. Shock. And for a while, the survivors who were teaching, one moment, were silent in shock. As far as tools go, the chainsaw has a straightforward purpose. It isn't very difficult to learn, but if used incorrectly, can lead to devastating consequences. Language, however, is a constantly evolving mechanism that adapts to each user's ability. Like water, it moves where it needs to, changes course entirely to fit all the tiny contours and spaces we share across the globe. In stagnancy, water becomes contaminated, infectious. The abuse of language breaks the contract of agreed comprehension. It mutates the communication. Exposure. That altered language has spread across this country like the virus William S. Burroughs always said it was. And its full impact is unknown. The spread of this virus is not categorized as a pandemic. It too, though, does not need to be seen to be believed. As of 2:35 a.m., October 14th, 2020, current CDC numbers tracking the coronavirus pandemic reported the total cases of infection in the United States at 7,787,548. As of that moment, 214,446 people dead. The beginning date of data collection was January 21st. While I don't recall that day specifically, I know that the news of the outbreak spreading throughout the world immediately alarmed me. The danger was almost tangible. It no longer felt like the sense of paranoia associated with watching in horror as Donald Trump exists. I realized more with each day that my compassion and patience toward people who supported him was fading, but I know that's exactly what they want us to feel. Each day, more and more people I encountered seemed suddenly confident enough to form a closed opinion about what was or wasn't happening. Rather than discussing the mass confusion that was creeping alongside the virus, because literally no one on the planet had enough information. Over the next few days, thousands more people formed an opinion regarding a global pandemic and have since been unwilling to reevaluate their stance, regardless of new and available information. The American response to this pandemic is a shameful disregard of human life. The responsibility for it is far more important than petty efforts to blame or justify the handling of all that has unfolded up to now. All of this results from our use of language, and more specifically, how the abuse of language has corrupted the entire history of our country and brought us here, right now, where intelligence still is frowned upon. We give opinion more merit than facts. Half of eligible voters are so disenchanted they never show up to the polls in the first place. And the president claims his own government to be so inadequate that the coming wave of voter fraud will be like nothing anyone has ever seen before. Pause. What he's trying to tell each and every one of us is that we're stupid. He never has to be specific about anything because none of us would understand anyway. Make no mistake, love him or hate him, none of us are worthy in his eyes. People everywhere are dying. At some point, I'd made a comment on Instagram that if the Trump family and all his cohorts were to contract the virus and meet death, I would start my own church. When he tested positive, I felt the presence of God and smiled. For this, I do not apologize. When the serpent prepares to poison the rabbit, but the eagle descends from above, devouring the serpent, nature does not weep. I prefer the survival of the rabbit above the serpent. I have no doubt that sufferers of oppression throughout the human story have offered prayers to their God for the removal of despots and tyrants who have forever sought dominion where others are working together to coexist. Our oldest philosophers warned of shadow makers, deceivers who hid the light from humans. They were chained to the floor, facing the end of a cave wall, while behind them the shadow makers cast images onto the wall. This was all the humans knew of reality until one day someone turned around, stepped through the shadow, and found the light. When he went back to tell the others, he was murdered. But the echo of his message resounded. Eventually the chains were broken, those who truly heard going in one direction together as the murderer set off alone. The progression of the human story has always been on a path towards selflessness, bound together, but not forced to take the journey. Direction is a choice. The one who saw the light went back to teach the others about what he had learned. The sacred gift of language guides us away from the darkness of what is unknown, each word offering light enough to continue forward together with nothing more than the simple commitment that when the darkness of confusion grows, we find new words to help one another see the way. The disfigured system of belief Trump presents is darkness. The person willing to murder us all with a chainsaw stole the room, grabbed the murderer from the cave, met up with the Proud Boys, and now all of them are standing by. Just beside them, there is an ever-increasingly visible trail of evidence, not to suggest or accuse, but to prove beyond all doubt that we are experiencing the deliberate and centuries-long effort of the United States government to dismantle, suppress, and herd its citizens into one giant genocidal machine that feeds but a privileged few, while most of us are ground to chum for the toothless bastards to slurp down and suck enough life from to keep it all going forever in the shadows. If you follow that trail, there is a pillager at sail across the ocean who saw something he hadn't seen in a while. It was land, and come to find out, land he had not seen before. People also shared this land together. They had never seen another human so different. They all had the gift, but not unlike their hair and skin, it was different too. They did not know what a pillager was. When they found the light, they found everything they needed to survive and never needed to look farther than one another. The pillager had seen other people before in many other lands. The pillager's people had seen the light and left the shadows, but they taught one another differently. The pillager was not alone, and the others with him helped gather and murder everyone else. They made a symbol for their people, marked the land as their own, and sailed home declaring discovery. The edited story went in one direction. The pieces removed from it caused the virus to mutate. Columbus, the Pilgrims, The indigenous tribes already here. For each one, another deception. What Columbus did was not discovery, and pilgrims were not seeking religious freedom or fleeing imperialism. They were a group of people so fanatical in their religious ideology, Great Britain rounded them up and said, if you insist on being this unreasonable, here's some ships and please leave and never come back. They must have felt at least mostly certain that the sea would take them quicker and cleaner than just killing them. No matter what, easier for the Brits. But no luck on the journey to the ocean floor. As we know, the psychotic lot of them hit a rock with their boat, put it in the books as landed, and found themselves in a now doubly stolen land. People already long since living there, pushed slowly out of the way, the meaning of their God disregarded, their land given a new name once it was overtaken. Puritans established a concept of God that saw human life not as part of the earth but superior to it, and also, believing themselves superior, proceeded to destroy the culture here before them, and felt it completely acceptable to accuse witchery and burn women alive. All the language used to tell their crooked story mutated again. As the new land was finally settled, they managed to establish a new kind of imperialism that would grow to make Britain's efforts to prevent the sun from setting on it forevermore in the shadow of their immaculate deception. The American dream. A new world where the people in control didn't have to go anywhere to conquer or colonize. War is peace, ignorance is strength, freedom is slavery. So many bought it then, and they still buy it now. Come get that freedom. We got it all right. Come to America. When World War II was over, people everywhere took a breath of relief. All the dim lights got a little brighter as we celebrated the defeat of what much of the world saw as poisonous ideology. At the same time, our use of the atomic bomb introduced something still darker to consider. Ourselves. Fear didn't quite mean the same thing anymore. And from that fear grew questions, and since there weren't any good answers, people continued the pursuit of information and shared experience, and that grew into an entirely new way of thinking that threatened the power structure, the counterculture. Beliefs were changing, and people were proving that it was an easier thing to do than we had been taught. Another war, but this time not everyone was willing to fight. More and more people had started to feel that they didn't approve of this war machine, and since the people claiming to represent the country kept sending children to kill other children, a governing body situated to work for the interest... Missed something there. Excuse me. Since the people claiming to represent the country kept sending children to kill other children, a second American Revolution started to take shape. There was not then, nor is there now, a governing body situated to work for the interest of this country. The revolution was dismantled. The civilian leaders of the counterculture were jailed, drugged, and otherwise disavowed. The people willing to use their voices to guide the changes at political level were all assassinated. By the end of the 1960s, the left wing had been attacked with such ferocity that we are just beginning to see the ripple effects finally approaching a distant horizon. When the war machine was almost stopped, as young people across the country were free enough for their minds to expand, and their ideas began to transition into reality as a result of their willingness to create what they felt was missing from the spaces they shared. These people created their own political parties and gave themselves the representation that was missing. They fought against inequality, and they placed their bodies, literally, in front of trains filled with young soldiers bound to war. They stopped them momentarily. It wasn't over. You'll notice those parties no longer exist. If they couldn't send us to die, they would simply find another way. The difference between ignorance and stupidity is simple. Ignorance is the absence of access to information, whereas stupidity is the unwillingness to consider anything than what is known by a single individual or group. If we don't have the right access to information, we can be kept ignorant. And if we can be taught that information isn't necessary because we already have the answer, we can be kept stupid. For example, part of the American dream promises religious freedom. That has never existed because at every step of the way, all other gods were erased. The people who wrote One Nation Under God all believed in the same God. Other ideas are tolerated at best. The gift of human language is to listen, learn, share, and teach. A Judeo-Christian answer to the question of God is handed to people born into the country before many ever ask the question within themselves about why we are here and how. The God concept is limited, not free. And that deception instills in us the same hubris that allowed the narrative of the United States to be written in the blood of all who have been slaughtered, and whose story was withheld from the record. It is important not only to consider God, but to leave space for others to explore the same. I say that because too many people already in power are there specifically to ensure their answer remains the one. Let us be free to explore and discuss beliefs, to share them. If you think I will suffer eternally for believing differently, I will find out eventually, accept, and move forward. That would be closer to religious freedom. Though language is socially constructed, it provides us with the ability to effectively communicate, and it works based on the decision that the power of language comes from the meaning we are able to ascribe. It gives us the power of naming. Meaning, then, being socially constructed, allows us to use combinations of sound and gesture to ensure that those combinations mean the same thing. Distortion is when an individual changes the agreed upon meaning without the changes being shared. Translation between various languages depends on a similar agreement, with the acceptance that direct correlation is not the end result. The nuances of using language as a tool requires us to accept something different, something always changing, to learn. By definition, long ago agreed upon, news involves the sharing of information. So as fake news has entered the cultural vocabulary straight from the mouth of the president, what we fail to discuss is that it doesn't mean anything at all. News, by definition, cannot be fake. It is a phrase that he uses every time someone questions him. It's no different than a child, ears plugged with fingers, making loud noises. Voting him out can improve things. It can, in spite of another long ripple effect. But it will only matter if all of us take a moment to realize that what every American is struggling to express right now is that we were never great. If so, when? Why? How long and for whom? There isn't an answer because Donald Trump made that phrase up. And what he means when he uses that word great, it's not the same as what anyone else means. And it doesn't have to be because his answer is the answer, and he doesn't need to tell anyone. The implication of loss in that statement is a whole new level of blasphemy. What is implied is that our country was better when less people had the opportunity to speak for themselves, to process new information, to have access to education, opportunity. He wants us all stupid, racist, afraid of each other and him. He wants to show us happiness like we've never seen. Law and order are waiting to make sure there will be a smile on every face. We are responsible to accept this opportunity to look at one another with the simple understanding that America does not mean the same thing to any of us. The social obstacles of racism, wealth distribution, and layer upon layer of inequality exists today because all the pieces of the story of this country cut out along the way must be returned. This election is not a vote for the lesser of two evils. It is a vote to reclaim who we are by reconstructing the narrative. COVID-19 has clogged the death machine, and it makes this vote too an opportunity to expose and dismantle it entirely. This is a vote to usher in reality and to the future provide a society restored and rebuilt on the truth that I do not exist without you. And it applies to each one of us, from the first breath to family to community and onward, exponentially back to the divine mystery. Without us, there wouldn't be a question about God. But with us, that question is always there. The answer is no longer hidden. America was never real. There were never United States. But this vote can renew the contract of language and let us begin now to make our name mean something better. Thank you.